Hi, I add my welcome to Sam's and my angst. Last week, Sam started working through the book of Romans, one of the books in the Christian scriptures that has been seminal in various times throughout our history, with the idea that once again it is offering a message about the myth of separation, which we've seen a lot of. And I'm going to continue that discussion. I'm going to start with a poem by one of the most famous Sufi poets, Hafiz. Sufism, as I'm sure many or most of you know, is the mystical branch of Islam. And it goes like this. I know the way you get when you haven't had a drink of love. Your face hardens, your sweet muscles cramp. Children become concerned about a strange look that appears in your eyes, which even begins to worry your mirror and your nose. Squirrels and birds sense your sadness and call an important conference in a tall tree. They decide which secret code to chant to help your mind and soul. Even angels fear that brand of madness that arrays itself against the world and throws sharp stones and spears into the innocent and into oneself. Oh, I know the way you can get if you haven't been drinking love. You might rip apart every sentence your friends and teachers say, looking for hidden clauses. You might weigh every word on a scale like a dead fish. You might pull out a ruler to measure from every angle in your darkness the beautiful dimensions of a heart you once trusted. I know the way you can get if you have not had a drink from love's hands. That's why all the great ones speak of the vital need to keep remembering God. So you will come to know and see this one as being so playful and just wanting to help. And that is why Hafiz says, bring your cup near me, for all I care about is quenching your thirst for freedom. All the sane one can ever care about is giving love. Well, it certainly appears that a lot of us have not been drinking from the cup of love this week. Or as one of my clients said, another blow to the oft quoted phrase that we've all come to get used to in the pandemic, we've got this. It just doesn't feel like we've got this. And I get that. Police brutality, the protests, violent and non, have highlighted the outrage that's simmering in the US. Pair that with the alarmingly high incidence of COVID-19 deaths among Black Americans and Hispanic Americans, high unemployment, long food lines. It's a perfect storm that has created a tsunami of reactions across the country. Sadly, this week, we can add the name of a 22-year-old San Francisco native, Sean Monterosa, to the list of people killed by a police officer. It happened in a parking lot in Vallejo, a town nearby us, while he kneeled in surrender. It seems he was eluding, although they haven't given us hardly any information since it happened in the middle of the week, nor have there been charges filed against the shooter, who all we know is that he, I think, or I don't know, he or she, is an 18-year veteran of the Vallejo Police, a police force that is known for its brutality. And while I find the looting and the burning and the other destruction of property really sad, I have to say that I get this too. I mean, I get it as much as a white person can get for what it feels like to be outraged and impotent in the face of one of the clearest examples of the myth of separation we've ever seen. I've heard many people this week condemn the looters as if they're different than the protesters, and that the destruction of property and looting is just wrong. And it reminds me of a Berkeley study that was done in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s, about the people who were protesting at that time in the Bay Area. And they said, yes, it's true, that there was a certain amount of the people who didn't care at all about getting us out of the Vietnam War. And they didn't care about civil rights. They just cared about being able to yell swear words and throw bricks. And I get that. But what I guess is if you could get underneath the story or get into the story of each one of those people, that you would find someone who was without a doubt a victim of some kind of trauma. And that what they were doing made sense for them as well. They had a reason. They're not the other. And then there's the condemnation of the police. And I get that too. It's terrible what's happened. And we have stacks of statistics that no one can deny about the racism that is deeply embedded in our criminal justice system. And I feel for the police. We have a beloved nephew who's a federal marshal who's been on the streets of Minneapolis for a week. And we've heard firsthand what it's like to keep the peace. Police officers aren't the other either. Our son Matt, who is an engineering physicist, who spent his high school career and his college career staying away from anything that wasn't math and science if he could, has decided to educate himself about what's going on by going back into history. And when we talked to him the other night, he told us how moved he was by Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And the thing that struck Matt more than anything was when Dr. King said that he was more disappointed in the white moderates than he was the white supremacists. Because the white moderates were saying, take your time. This takes time. Change is slow. Makes sense to me that people of color in the land of the free and the home of the brave are tired of waiting for that change. They have too long been seen as other. So I get the perspective that violence may be the only way to get our attention. Trevor Noah of The Daily Show, when talking about the violence among the protesters, said much the same thing, and he concluded with this Seuss-like rhyme. It's wrong to do it in the streets. It's wrong to do it in the tweets. You cannot do it in the field. You cannot do it if you've kneeled, though that's changing. And don't do it if you're rich, you ungrateful son of a bitch, because there's one thing that's a fact: you cannot protest if you're Black. Those of us that came of age in the late 60s and early 70s remember the hope we had in the midst of the chaos of that time. We were absolutely certain that out of that chaotic, crazy time, major shifts would happen in our world. How can it be that we have made so little progress? And how do we hold all this? How do we hold our anxiety and our sadness and our anger, the recognition of our own culpability, as Sam was talking about earlier? And how can we be a part of the immense task of righting the wrongs that can no longer be tolerated? The answer to both of these questions is to have a drink of love, to open our hearts wider and wider, to allow our minds to expand and let our circles of care and concern expand and expand and expand until we surround the planet. And this is the hardest thing of all to do. There are so many dimensions of the one who invites us to drink from the cup of love. And each dimension reveals a timeless truth about the ground of being, this alive consciousness in which we swim. And one of those truths is that the universe is saturated by love, that it is love, and that everything in it is an expression of love. We are told by the spiritual traditions, ancient and modern, that we can trust this loving presence that pervades everything, and that we can rest in its loving embrace and exude that boundless love through every pore of our body. But here's what I know. The human journey begins with a perceived separation from the ground of being. It is the normal course of coming into form, and it's a long journey for us to realize and then to actually experience the reality of that boundless love. We don't see each other as one just because they've told us it's true. We don't see everyone as not other because we've heard it since we were children. It takes time and practice, and most of all, it takes compassion for ourselves. One of the things that made me crazy when I was in seminary was how many of my fellow students would preface what they were about to say or finish what they were about to say by saying, "But that's not very Christian of me." Now, lest you think that I'm picking on the Christians, I know that it's not the only tradition that does not major in practice. But it was at the time a tradition that was surrounding me, and it made me nuts. And after I finished seminary, I went to work at the counseling center, and I started working with people who were saying the same thing, talking about what was on their hearts and minds, and then saying, "But that's not very Christian of me." So one day in supervision, I brought this particular case with me and wanted to talk about how frustrated I was by the lack of compassion that these students that we were working with had for themselves. The director of the counseling center, who's a clinical psychologist, was skilled in psychometrics. And so in his quiet, sweet way, when I finished my rant, he said, "That's why Christians score high on the lie scale on the MMPI, particularly seminary students." And as one, all 9 of us went and stared at him. Like, what? And he said, "Oh yeah, that's pretty well known that those of you that don't know the MMPI, it's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and it's a widely used measure of one's psychological health." And he said it's pretty widely known that because there's such a big gap between what they're told to believe and how they are, what they're told, how they're told to act and how they do act, right? That when asked questions on this inventory, particularly those that are going to try and get into seminary, they lie. And there's a lie scale built into the instrument that tells the tester, this is not a truth teller. And I've never forgotten that, because it seems like it's such a clear example of how it's not possible for us to be the ways that we're taught to be without practice, without time, and with most of all, without compassion. So in the weeks ahead, as we continue to unpack this journey, what I hope I'll be able to give you is the trajectory such that you can appreciate how far you've come, and so you can understand your next steps. Every single one of us wants to be part of this moment that is so pregnant with possibility. Every single one of us, deep in our hearts, believes that out of this time of chaos, something new, something more beautiful can come. And every single one of us have blocks that stop the full expression of who we are and what we have to give. So the next time you notice your own brand of thoughts and feelings and behaviors that tell you that you haven't had a drink of love, the first step, instead of chastising yourself, is to put your hand over your heart. And as one of my teachers, Sylvia Boorstein, used to say, we should start every sentence to ourselves with sweetheart. So put your hand over your heart and say, sweetheart, you are an expression of love. And over time, you are becoming more of who you really are. Sorry, I don't have my tech guy instrument.